Today we're dealing with the Middle Ages, or medieval times. The first king that we're going to talk about is a guy named Charlemagne. He was actually the king of France, Germany, and Italy, basically the old Roman Empire. His nickname was Charles the Great, and he was religious and Christian at that. He spread Christianity throughout his kingdom. Remember, we've talked about how easy it is for empires to help spread religion. Because a man has an empire, people in his kingdom usually have the same religion as he does, or she does. Charlemagne had missi dominici, or officials who were supposed to administer law and help the people, whether they were poor, widowed, or less fortunate. These missi dominici would go from town to town to make sure that people were obeying the law and not taking advantage of those who were less fortunate. Charlemagne himself promoted education. He could read, but he couldn't write. I know that's a little weird, but that's the truth. He set up a school because he wanted intelligent officials to help him rule his kingdom. He understood the importance of a good education and how important his officials, being intelligent, were to leading a successful empire. When he died, there was a struggle for power for his kingdom. Eventually, his 3 grandsons split up his kingdom. This was called the Treaty of Verdun. His kingdom was split into 3, which made his kingdom much weaker and more susceptible to attack. This also created much more diversity throughout Europe because each new kingdom could have its own set of laws, its own monetary system, and its own customs. Feudalism came about in the Middle Ages also. Feudalism is a loose system of rule where lords divided land among lesser lords known as vassals. A lord would give an estate or large chunk of land to a vassal and protection. In exchange, the vassals would give money in the form of taxes and 40 days of military service if the lord required it. They would also give advice if something was happening within the land. A liege lord was declared in the case of a vassal having 2 separate lords and those lords having a conflict. The lord's estate itself was called a manor and was pretty self-sufficient. They had animals and food growing. Peasants lived on the lord's estate or the manor also. Most of the population were peasants in medieval Europe. Peasants are common people, and they had a very tough life. Many of these peasants were called serfs. Serfs were bound to the land and couldn't leave without the lord's permission. They were just a step above slaves. These peasants had rough lives and rarely lived past the age of 35. They had to work long hours. They had a very simple diet. And if they were lucky enough to have animals, they herded them inside their huts or little houses to sleep. Knights were also around at this time. A knight's life began at the age of 7 when they left their parents' home. Not anybody could just be a knight. Peasants were not allowed. They usually had to be upperclassmen, if you will. As I said, at the age of 7, they would leave their parents' home and they'd become a page. A page went to live with a knight and generally only cleaned armor and was a gopher. They eventually learned how to ride and fight at about the age of 14 to 15. They were called squires at that age. At the age of 18 and between 21, they were dubbed when the knight took the flat edge of the sword, put it on both shoulders and on the top of the head, and said, "I dub thee, sir," whatever. Knights were supposed to follow a code of conduct called chivalry. Chivalry is kind of like being a gentleman. You needed to be honest, fair, and help the weak. Often these knights had tournaments to prove who was the strongest knight in the land.